Hello, nerds for Yang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds. Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello,
nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's and Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
I have none other than Anthony freaking Scaramucci on the Nerds for Humanity show. Anthony, welcome to the Nerd Zone. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, and I'm going to state the obvious. Even though I have an Italian exoskeleton, I am a huge nerd. I mean, like a nerd that was probably raised by like an Iron Dragon lady. That sort of a nerd. You know what I'm saying? I don't want anybody. And by the way, I'm going to pan the room here. See all the books? Okay, come on. And Room Grader on Twitter, when they saw the room, they said, "All right, the guy knows. At least he reads."
Now, those aren't decorative books. Some of them have been read.
Correct. I have a very smart brain, as Trump would say. Very smart brain. And I'm very good with words. I know words.
You know all the best words. That's right.
Please.
I know. All right. Well, we are definitely
going to be here, Tom.
We're definitely going to touch on the Trump days. But before we go there, I did want to talk a little bit about sort of the early Mooch era. And because, you kind of came on the scene and everybody kind of instantly knew you as the Mooch. But I'm just kind of curious, where'd your story begin and how did you become who you are today?
I got raised on Long Island. I grew up in a blue collar family. My dad was a crane operator for 41 years, same construction company. He was in the local union. He made a very nice hourly wage in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I think what ended up happening is wages got sluggish, frankly, in the 90s. But he bought himself a house for $16,000 in 1962. My parents still live in that house. It's 2 miles from where I'm talking to you from. I live out on Long Island. I got raised in an Italian, Irish, and African-American community. So we beat the living daylights out of each other for the first 18 years. The public high school, because it was out here on Long Island, there was a blend of blue-collar people with affluent people. I got very blessed. I went to a very well-budgeted public high school. And so my K through 12 experience in the public school system was great. My grades were good enough. I ended up going to Tufts University, which was very expensive at that time. It's about $70,000 or $80,000 now, but at that time it was like $24,000. My dad was probably making $32,000 a year back in 1982 when I got accepted, and he did something that changed my life. So I want to set the scene for you. I had a couple of jobs. I worked in my uncle's motorcycle shop. I was I stamped produce and so forth at Key Food, which is the local grocery store. And I had a paper route. So I had 3 jobs because I wanted to buy myself a car. Mm-hmm. And so, Tom, you probably didn't grow up out on Long Island, but I'm a Long Island Guido. So what do you think I was driving? Okay. I was driving a Camaro. Okay. So I had gold chains. I was an Italian retard out cruising in my IROC. I had the power booster. And I focused all my energy on where the women were. And I'm going to embarrass myself further. When I got into high school, and you remember the drinking age back then was 18. So we used to go to all the bars. I used to do push-ups in the parking lot of the bars just to bulk myself up. Okay. Just to
get ready.
Fully humiliate myself. So, but I had very good grades in high school. I had a good SAT score. I ended up getting into Tufts. And I remember the seminal moment for me is my dad handed me a cash value check from his life insurance. So he had a union life insurance that he paid into, and he cashed that. It was like a $200,000 life insurance policy. I said, "Dad, you cashed out the life insurance?" Because look, I have no money. You're on your own, but here's 10 grand to help you get started at Tufts. Wow. And that was a seminal moment for me because I had school loans, couple of jobs. I was delivering pizza. If anybody here went to Tufts in the 80s, a place called Espresso's Pizza, I was one of their delivery people. And I was worked my way through school. And then when I got into Harvard, my mom and dad are blue collar people, so they thought it was Hartford, and that's been a standing joke in the family for 35 years. So my mother's packing the car Labor Day weekend, 1986, and she's got the map out, and I'm like, "What are you doing, Mom?" "Well, we're going to Hartford, right?" I said, "No, Mom." "Well, didn't you get into Hartford Law School?" I said, "No, Mom, I got into Harvard Law School." "Why would they name it Hartford Law School if it's not Harvard?" "No, Ma, it's Harvard, Harvard." So that was the big joke growing up with my folks. They were just hardworking people. And my dad was a very strict disciplinarian, and he's still a bit of a hard ass today at age 85. Okay. He has never seen a cannoli, Tom, inside of a 6-foot perimeter of his body that didn't enter his body. Okay. I mean, this guy is, he's like a living legend on Long Island. But so I went to Tufts and Harvard. I learned quickly I didn't want to be a lawyer. So my first job was at Goldman. And then I left Goldman to start a hedge fund in 1996 at the age of 32. It went pretty well, but that was also a bull market. Don't confuse brains with the bull market. And then I ended up selling to Neuberger Berman. So people that are listening from a money management perspective, Neuberger was a publicly traded company at that time. It purchased my firm in November of 2001. And then we went into Lehman Brothers 2 years later. So that was a fascinating time for me. I wrote a book back then called Goodbye, Gordon Gekko, How to Find Your Fortune Without Losing Your Soul. And I just talked about that rite of passage, not knowing any better, never seeing the inside of a commercial office building. My first job interview at Harvard for Goldman, I was dressed in 100% polyester. Had a polyester shirt on, a polyester tie. My hair was blown back by like Tony Manero in Saturday Night Live. And I was talking about the TED spread and all this esoteric financial stuff. And the partner from Goldman was like, "Look, man, you're a smart kid, but you are literally the worst dressed person that we met at the Harvard Law School." I was like fully flammable for the interview, Tom. At any moment, I could have caught fire given the polyester, the petroleum I was wearing. But so I bought myself a natural fiber suit, went down to Goldman, worked there 7 years, built a hedge fund, sold it. And then in March of 2005, I left Lehman Brothers before the 2008 crisis to start Skybridge. And so less my 11-day fiasco in Washington, I've been working at Skybridge the last 15 years. And if you had this conversation with me on February 1st, I had $9.6 billion under management. But since you're having this conversation with me in late April,
a little bit less.
I have 7.7 billion under management. But listen, it's a great business and we're doing well, and we'll dig ourselves out of the hole that we're all in right now.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts about the future in a second. Before we go there, when you got into Tufts and then got into Harvard, like how was the family? Must have been super proud and excited, or were they just like, whatever, Harvard, it's no big deal?
Yeah,
or?
That's the beauty of growing up in the blue, like, I know this is going to sound stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, when I was growing up, we lived near like the affluent community of Sands Point. And so my friends were always like, "Oh, someday we'd love to work super hard, live the American dream and buy one of those houses." Right.
Yeah.
But like when you're growing up like I did, the expectations from my parents were so low that, meaning like if I had just gone to a college, that would have been wonderful for them. When I told my mother that I wanted to be a lawyer, she thought that was the greatest thing. I mean, she was cooking like a million meatballs, And Justice Scalia, when he got named to the Supreme Court, my mother and grandmother thought this was like the greatest thing that ever happened in the Italian American community. And so I had met with Justice Scalia in 2014 before he passed away. And I said, "What is it with these Italian women with judges and like lawyers and stuff?" And she's like, "Well, you got to understand, if you're going to law school, your mother thinks that you're not corruptible. You're not going to end up in the mob." And this is coming from Justice Scalia, right? So the point I'm making is just the fact that I was going to school and was going to be a lawyer. My parents care less. In fact, my mother was heartbroken when I told her that Goldman Sachs was not a law firm. It took her about 3 years to figure out that I wasn't really working as a lawyer inside of Goldman Sachs. So, so it's weird. Like if you grow up like that, and I'm sure many of your listeners have grown up like that, the expectations are low. So, your parents are proud of you no matter what. I would tell rich people that are listening here, your rich, nerdy friends, go easy on the kids. Don't beat the hell out of them. They're doing the best they can, and try to get them to do what they want to do in life and what they love, and not what you think is going to look good at a cocktail party or at a country club. Like my kid went to this place or that place while you're sipping your martini. I got one kid that's at Stanford Business School. My daughter's acting. She just graduated from Brown. My youngest of my adult children, because I have two younger children, is 20. His name's Anthony, and he calls himself the Mooch. And you can find him at Mooch World. He is one of the more prolific videographers for the music industry. So he just did a music video with Travis Barker and Machine Gun Kelly and Ian Dior, where he produced and directed the whole thing. That's what he wants to do for a living. I tell people, remember what Mel Brooks said. He's 95 years young. Mel Brooks has the best line of all time. Relax. None of us are getting out of here alive. Okay. And I think it's a great line. And believe me, when I got fired from the White House, I had to say that line to myself a lot.
So let's talk a little bit about, your whole career has been in finance, and then you end up reporting to the president of the United States. Like, how did that kind of come to pass?
Well, in hindsight, it would have never happened with any other president. If I worked for Mitt Romney, I was on his campaign team. I was on his big donor team. Had he become president, could I have gotten on an advisory board? Could I have gotten, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be an ambassador. I mean, but I'm saying that those are the types of jobs that finance people for campaigns get. But what happened with President Trump is I was one of his media surrogates during the campaign, and I was one of his chief media surrogates during the transition. And so he wanted me to go work for him. My wife told me don't do it. Didn't really like him very much. There's a lot of reasons why, but I would say that Melania probably hates Trump more than my wife, but they're up there. It's like a close second. And so she tried to talk me out of it. Then we ended up getting into a fight over the whole damn thing. But when he won, and none of us thought he was going to win, that next day, as the president-elect of the United States, he said, "Hey, you're going to come down to Washington and work with me." I was like, "Well, I don't really want to do that. I got my own business, making very reasonably good money. I've got my show. Some of your listeners may remember me as the host of Wall Street Week. I had taken that over from Louis Rukeyser. It's a Friday night show on the Fox Business Network. I didn't really want to give that up either. But he was the president of the United States, and I had lived a good part of the American dream, and I got seduced by that. So for the nerds out there that are listening, you are, you're nerds for humanity, so you are human. And so what happens is when you're human, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to get tempted by certain things. And one of the big mistakes that I made is I put my ego into the situation. I said, okay, well, I work for the president of the United States. I can affect policy. A lot of the people that I grew up with are not doing great right now. There's a big income divide. Maybe I could be helpful. Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, for whatever reasons, I thought those guys were my friends. Silly me. They came after me behind my back and did everything they could to block me from getting my original job, which was to be the OPL director. And so I said, all right, I called President Trump. I said, these guys, they suck. They're bad dudes. When you want to get rid of them, call me. I'll take care of it for you. So that was classic ego and pride mistake number two. When he called me and said, you were right, come down here and help me fix it, I said, yes. My wife was like, you're crazy. Why are you going to give all this up? And so I went down there to help him fix it. I had my emotions tied to getting those guys out. I said something really stupid to a reporter, which was really funny, by the way. I mean, I'm not going to repeat it on your podcast because it's not appropriate for all ages, but I said something to an Italian reporter from Long Island whose father was friends with my dad. I thought we were off the record. He taped it. And I never technically said we were off the record. And so he ran to CNN with the tape, and then I got fired. And so I was in the White House for 11 days. I got blown into Pennsylvania Avenue like I was an Austin Powers villain. And that was fine. I got rid of Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus. So I feel like I did my service to the world, especially with Steve Bannon. I mean, that guy's completely nuts. But I dusted myself off. If you're having a bad day, nerds out there, pay attention. If you're having a bad day, think of me on July 31st, 2017, blown from the White House. My wife had filed for divorce on me, and I had my business up for sale, and it wasn't clear whether or not I was going to be able to get my business back. So for me, it was a little bit like It's a Wonderful Life, being George Bailey driving in the car. I bumped my head on the bridge. I'm in this alternative universe. And I was like, this sucks. I would like to get back to where I was. And the good Lord or the universe granted my wish. So I got my business back. I got my wife back. We reconciled. I'm back working. Now I'm getting beat up in the global pandemic, but let's face it, who isn't? Right? Who isn't? So we're all here together. See things through, have this fortitude. I guess my message to people is just to be as upfront and as transparent as possible, because that's where real leadership lives, in the authenticity. Admit your mistakes. Too much pride, too much ego got me in trouble in the White House. Fish out of water. I'm more experienced in finance and more experienced in the media elements related to finance. Politics is a totally different space. It's not something I was familiar with. I tell my Wall Street friends, Tom, that you think they're killers on Wall Street. You never met anybody like these people. The Wall Street guys are like babies compared to these people in Washington. I tell my buddies, I want you to imagine the worst person you ever met on Wall Street. That's the best person in Washington. I mean, these people are nuts. I mean, they'll do anything to hurt each other for the tiniest of stakes. It's sort of a weird thing that goes on when you're close to power. It can be very, very corruptive, and it can make you do very diabolical things. So for me, it's a great learning lesson. I'm glad to be back in my business, and I learned a lot. So I'm happy about that as well.
If you go back to 2017 and the president says, "Hey, I need you," would you say no, can't do it, or would you do it? But kind of
knowing what I know now, look, it's a hard question, right? Because the benefit of what happened to me is I got to meet a lot of very interesting people that I probably never would have met before, Yeah. And, Bill Maher and I became close. I do a show a couple times a year. Steve Colbert and I became close. I mean, and when I say close, I mean, we're acquaintances. I mean, meaning that I'm close enough to go on the show a few times a year. I don't want to exaggerate my relationships, but the point is that there was a lot of positive externalities that came out of it. And it was incredibly humbling in terms of the way it went down, which was actually very good from an anchoring perspective and from a staying grounded perspective. So I would say to you that I probably wouldn't do it again, but I'm very glad that I did it. And I probably wouldn't do anything differently because I don't really want to change who I am. I sort of like who I am, the strengths and weaknesses. Certainly, I probably wouldn't have talked to that reporter, but I was coming at that job with a lot of authenticity. And you probably don't remember that 3 years ago, but they were having a leaking problem. I was working through the leakers pretty quickly. I was applying a business executive's management style to a political problem. And if I was given a little bit more time, I think I would have been successful in accomplishing what needed to be accomplished back then. But listen, things happen for a reason, and I'm on your podcast. So what could be worse?
There you go.
I'm doing pretty well.
You could be worse.
You. Exactly.
So let's just hypothetically, let's say the reporter didn't record you or assumed it was off the record, just two Long Island guys talking. What do you think you would have been able to get done? Or
I would have been fired probably by Labor Day, to be totally candid, because the president did something the first day of the job that made it impossible for me to stay. And you wouldn't remember this, but he was so mad at Reince Priebus that we were standing in the Oval Office together, and he said, "You're reporting directly to me," meaning me.
Right.
And so I was the White House communications director, and the memo said that I was reporting directly to the president, not reporting to the chief of staff to the president.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh, it's a huge deal.
So that killed me right there, because unless he was going to make me chief of staff, which, believe it or not, that was a job I would not have taken. I was arguing with him about taking the communications job because I said, well, I don't have any. I'm reasonably good on TV. I can articulate myself. You may or may not have saw my press conference the day that I got hired. I answered all the questions from the reporters, but I'm not a communications political operative. And so we had a debate over whether or not that job. So unless he was going to make me chief of staff, the next chief of staff, in that case, it was John Kelly, it would have been impossible for him to keep me on the job. He would have either had to move me to another part of the administration out of the White House or fired me. And so I gave him a very easy excuse to fire me the first day he came in. Now, you may or may not know this, but John Kelly and I have become very good friends. He came to my SALT conference. I interviewed him there. We've done 5 or 6 different public speeches together. And John Kelly is a great American. He spent 40 years in the U.S. Marines. He was a decorated war hero, a 4-star general. And him and I have become very close. He lost his son in Iraq. And so he's a 4-star general and a Gold Star family member. And even though he fired me and I was sore at him and he was sore at me, we reconciled and become very good friends. I think that's another learning lesson. No grudges, own your mistakes. I never blamed anybody else for my firing, Tom. I basically said, okay, I made the mistake. I got fired. Don't blame the president. I don't blame Chief of Staff Kelly or the reporter. It's my bad. But the flip side is I tell younger people, you make the mistake, own the mistake, but then take the millstone of regret off your neck and put it down. I don't wake up in the morning and kick myself in the pants and say, oh, geez, I made a mistake in the White House 3 years ago and I got embarrassingly fired. I go forward and do what I think is best for myself, my staff, my clients, and my family. I think that's a big lesson for people. Don't harbor, if you didn't get it right, big deal, move on. Tomorrow's another day.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, one of the things you mentioned was you tried to go in there and take this kind of hard-nosed CEO type kind of approach to getting stuff done. Yeah. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people look at President Trump as someone with great business leadership experience and great achievement. But when I watch him communicate and try and retain a world-class team, I don't see that. I don't see a lot of structured thinking or data-driven decision-making or KPIs or anything that normally you would expect like a business person to think about. And I was curious, what's your interpretation of his style? What is his leadership style? How would you describe it?
Well, listen, I mean, I'm trying to be very objective at this point. You can't take away from him his success. He built a real estate business that had its highs and lows. He had a casino. It went bankrupt. He rebuilt himself. He had an award, if not an award-winning, a very high-rated television show for 15 years. It's very, very hard to have a TV show last that long. And then in 17 short months, he went from being a reality star and a business person to the American presidency. So we have to stipulate that he has good political instincts. But he was used to having everything run by himself. And he was used to having sort of a personality cult business. And when you're transposing that or dropping that sort of personality into a 4.2 million employee federal government with a system of checks and balances, I think he's run roughshod over a lot of those people and a lot of those institutions. And I think that one thing that we've learned is he's not great at managing a process. And he's also, because of that whole personality cult thing, he wants to be the center of attention. So there are no co-stars in the Trump's orbit. Yet your nerds for humanity, your listeners know that to be a really, really good leader, you have to share the credit. To be a good leader, you have to delegate to people and give them a level of autonomy so that you can expand the confidence base of the people that are working for you or with you. And I think that's been one of the big problems here. I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people that left the White House, left the administration, said, geez, He's created a lot of dysfunctionality in the executive branch. If he ever gets to a serious crisis, will he be able to handle that crisis? Will the executive branch be coordinated enough to handle the crisis? And a lot of people, myself included, said, no, that's not going to happen. He's got things too dissembled because he doesn't really have a typical hierarchical management style. And so that's sort of where we are right now. So all that stuff you're talking about, all that vernacular is not even stuff that he would understand. That's sort of Stanford and Harvard Business School stuff. That's not President Trump.
What do you think he did at Wharton? Like it seems like he doesn't have the Wharton style of leadership either. Like he went there.
I mean, I think he went there for a couple of years, right? He was at Fordham. He transferred into Wharton. Again, I don't want to take away his intelligence. I think people that say, well, he's not smart, you can't say that. He got to the American presidency. He may not be smart the way you or I are. He doesn't probably have a lot of books that he's reading. Even though he's written a lot of books, we used to tease him. I said, yeah, you wrote a lot of best-selling books that you've never read. And he would let out a big laugh. Now he's so sensitive. I mean, you can't say that shit to him anymore. He gets too sensitive and he gets too brittle with the reporters. But, listen, I mean, he probably has a learning disability that was undiagnosed when he was going to school in the early 50s. And it manifested itself into developing habits of assimilating information different from you or me. So if you were blind, you could probably hear better. If you can't see, you pick up that peripheral hearing. If you're deaf, you can probably see better. You pick up that peripheral vision. So to me, I think President Trump has intelligence. It's not literary intelligence. It's not book smart intelligence, but he's got other levels of intelligence. Unfortunately, in the situation that he's in right now, again, this is my opinion, he's not well suited for that job. His communication skills and his competitive skills to win the job didn't transfer over into great managerial skills to really execute the job in the way that I think could have been way more successful. He just wasn't capable of doing it.
Now, you talked about interacting with a lot of former Trump administrative folks. One of the things I guess they say, at least in school, is like you got to hire people smarter than you. You got to build a team of people that are better at you at a lot of things.
Yeah.
How would you describe like his team and his? Because a lot of people were thinking, well, yeah, he's a bit of a showman, but if he surrounds himself by really capable people, because at one time there was like Mattis, there was Kelly, there was
Tillerson.
Cohn. Like there were some pretty accomplished people around him.
Yeah.
What do you think happened? Like did they just weren't able to work with him, or vice versa, or what happened there?
Well, I mean, it's a typical pattern. I mean, remember when I got fired in July of 2017, it was a big deal. But when you put it in context, 3 years later, 85 senior people have either left the administration, resigned from it, or been fired. It's like one more chip in the mosaic of people. And so typical stuff. And so one of the issues that President Trump has is he's a very insecure guy, which is hard to believe because when you look at his portfolio of life experiences and his marriage and the fact he made it to the American presidency, you'd ask yourself, well, why would the guy be insecure? But, I can't answer that. Some people, for whatever reason, have a chip on their shoulder or some kind of void. And so he hired some smart people at the beginning. I think he was fearful. He wanted to make sure he had very smart people in the beginning. But when they started getting credit for things, he hated that. There are no co-stars in Donald Trump's orbit. There are no people that you can he can point to. He doesn't even like Melania getting credit or Ivanka getting credit, And so when Jim Mattis is getting credit, he get mad. When Anthony Fauci is getting credit, he'll leave him out of the briefings a couple of times. He doesn't like other people in the spotlight. And that's a sign of insecurity. The other thing he'll say is that he's a very stable genius, or he's smarter than his generals, or he's out there telling people he knows more than the epidemiologists. It's another sign of insecurity. You're nerds for humanity. Really smart nerds know that they're smart, but they're they're smart here. They may not be smart there, and they need to get help in other places.
Mm-hmm.
I have some level of intelligence. I went to a couple fancy schools, but I'm not going to turn to you and say, Tom, I'm way smarter than the epidemiologist. Let me tell you how we're going to do things in the middle of a global pandemic, And by the way, in fairness to him, I don't think you're shutting the economy down January 21st when the first case shows up like it did in South Korea. We just didn't have the cultural experience that Asians did in understanding pandemics like SARS and MERS and what the potential risks were. And so I accept the fact that locking us down January 21st wasn't the right thing to do. But by early February, when the data was in, and pandemic guys like Tom Bossert, who's a very close personal friend of mine, who was in charge of the president's pandemic team until he got let go, his 6-person pandemic team was disbanded in 2018. He's out there writing in the Washington Post, please, dear God, shut the country down. You're going to have 1 million deaths. That's President Trump. It's sort of one-dimensional, linear thinking, telling people it's a hoax, telling people it's a conspiracy. I get it. You could be Jesus and not shut the economy down on the right day. I don't want to be overly critical, but waiting until March 16th, when every person around you from a public health and safety perspective was telling you to shut it down, that had very consequential effects on the number of tragedies in terms of deaths. And the great irony is the businessman president did more to hobble the U.S. economy than to help it. Because we've now, if you had shut it down in February, you'd be already starting the green shoot idea of opening the economy now. But look, we're here now. All we can do is go forward. I'm very optimistic about the future because it's an amazing world and an amazing country. And all that stimulus money will find its way into markets and into people's pocketbooks and lifestyles. We just have to deepen it now. Hopefully we can take this as a historic opportunity to help people on Main Street and to sort of close the wealth gap that we're all experiencing.
Anthony, let me ask you this. Before we rebranded the channel Nerds for Humanity, it used to be called Nerds for Yang after the Andrew Yang campaign.
Yeah.
And, a lot of what he was talking about in terms of the economic efficiency of basic income and just sort of bypassing the bureaucracy seems to really have a lot of more relevance today than even when he was running. And I was kind of curious because we're approaching $3 trillion in spending now for this recovery. And a lot of people are saying like they're not seeing it, or, the SBA website's down and there's all this paperwork and there's all these rules on who can get money and who can. And invariably, like Harvard ends up getting help, but like some mainstream businesses don't. What are your thoughts on how this stimulus is going?
Well, I wrote an article on the stimulus calling for $3.2 trillion and for at least $1.1 trillion of that going Andrew Yang style in terms of helicoptering it into the economy. I can send it to you, but you could go to CNN.com and you'll see the whole articulation of why we needed $3.2 trillion of stimulus. And so what basically started to happen is, we got 2.2, and now to your point, if you add up everything, we're closer to 3. And trust me, I do believe we'll go over 3 because it's needed. But as it relates to Andrew Yang, I didn't study his campaign as carefully as I did after the fact. I got a chance to meet Andrew in one of the green rooms at CNN, or maybe it was in the lobby at CNN with his team. And I think the guy's a brilliant, ahead of his time, sees around the corner, sort of an innovator. And the more I studied the idea, and I think I tweeted this out at one point, don't listen to these conservative think tanks. The idea of universal income is arguably one of the most capitalistic things intellectually that I've ever seen in my life, because if you can provide some basic level of healthcare plus some basic level of income, you now have created the opportunity to fully articulate the individual And if you really study the Western canon of literature and democracy that dates back to the foundation stone in Jerusalem, works its way through Athens and Rome, and eventually into Paris, the salons there, and up into London and out to the United States, that Western canon of individualism, Andrew Yang is ahead of his time. And so I predict that if we move our society away from, Tom, left and right thinking about policy and more to what's right or wrong, policies like the one that Andrew Yang was supporting will come into vogue. And I believe we will see a day where what Andrew Yang was talking about in 2020 is a reality for our society and perhaps the globe. And so I'm a big proponent of it. I can explain it to people. And I applaud him for seeing it before others saw it, frankly.
What do you think is going to happen in November with the election? What are your thoughts on the outcome? And
an incumbent, it's always the incumbents to win or lose. It's always a referendum on the incumbent. You know, it's sort of Jimmy Carter, not Jimmy Carter, George Herbert Walker Bush, not George Herbert Walker Bush. And so this will be Trump or not Trump. And so, or Donald Trump. And I would say to you that he's going to have a hard time because you've never had a incumbent win in the last 100 years where you've had a recession in the year that the incumbent is running for the reelection. It's not happened. So he's a very good marketer. What we know about presidential elections and campaigns, they're marketing contests, they're marketing competitions. And so he's a very good marketer, so you can't count him out. And I was with him during the Access Hollywood fiasco. That was October 7th, 2016. And we thought for sure he was going to lose, and then he went on to win. So you can't sit here today, it being 180 or so days from the election, and completely write him off. Can't do that. 180 days in Trump world, Tom, that's like 500 years, man. It's like going back to Christopher Columbus. You know what I mean? I mean, just think about where we were 60 days ago and where we are right now, right? So you can't do that. But I do think he loses because I think there's an exhaustion. I think the dislikability quotient is so high now. And you have people that are fervent anti-Trump. And I'll give you some supporting data. Super Tuesday 3, 500,000 additional registered Democrats voted in the Michigan primary versus Super Tuesday 3 in 2016. That tells you, you know, that there's going to be a lot of pressure in there. Now, if Steve Mnuchin's right, we have a very quick recovery. We're out of this thing by August or September, and the market's rallying, and the economy's doing well. Can he preach that narrative? Yeah. So I don't want to rule him out, but I think it's even money to slightly favor Joe Biden at this point.
And as an investor, do you take the position of Mnuchin that'll be like kind of hitting the unpause button and we'll be back to where we were, or do you think it'll be a long recovery?
Yeah. So I'm in the closer to the Mnuchin camp. I mean, I don't think you can quote unquote hit the pause button, but I don't see anything structurally wrong with where we were on March 1. And I know people are eager to get back to work. I've got in my study here somewhere the Great Influenza. I was reading it. I would hold it up if I could find it, but it was written by John Barry, and it was a study of the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918. And just a bit of trivia, it actually started in Kansas with a farmer. He thinks he got it from a pig, but we called it the Spanish flu because that was the only press community that was writing about the pandemic. The U.S. press wasn't even writing about it, but it's a very interesting book. I think there's a lot of comparative analysis there. Gigantic tragedy, 45 million people dead, 675 dead in the United States. But the comeback was extraordinary. It led to the Roaring 20s. There was a tremendous amount of pent-up consumption. And the minute, Tom, that people could get out of their houses, they did, and they went with a flourish, even during Prohibition, to go crazy with the consumption. And I think that's what America is about. So I predict that will happen.
Oh, well, that's, I hope you're right, man. And I know we promised to keep this to about 40 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a three there. I didn't realize that you were connected into Andrew, by the way. I didn't, for some reason, I didn't know the history there, but he'll be back. He'll be back. He'll likely run for president again or have a role in an administration. He's a guy I'm paying a lot closer attention to, and I'm reading almost everything the guy's writing because I really think he's onto something.
I agree. Yeah, a lot of us are ready for 2024. Can't come soon enough.
Well, remember, if it's Joe Biden, you'll have to wait till 2028, I think, for Andrew Yang. But yeah,
you think it will be 2 terms?
Oh, well, I don't know. Well, I mean, they always say they're going to be 1 term until they become president.
That's right.
I don't know. But let's say, it'll either be 2024 or 2028. But Andrew's onto something, and I have an enormous amount of respect for him.
Thank you, Anthony. And thank you so much for spending time with us. And with that, we're going to say goodbye, nerds.
All right. Goodbye, nerds.